There is a moment that many empaths have experienced, even if they never had the language to name it before. It is the moment you meet a complete stranger, yet inside you rises a sense of familiarity so intense it feels unsettling. Not the kind of familiarity the mind recognizes, but a deep, instant resonance, as if something within you has just been activated. You may not believe in destiny or in stories about souls, but you still cannot deny that feeling. I've known this person somewhere before. And that very feeling is where everything begins. Empaths often describe it this way. They do not fall in love slowly. They enter this bond with their entire nervous system, their entire intuition, their entire heart. Everything happens fast, deep, and feels inexplicably right. The other person seems to see them, to listen to them, to touch emotional layers that few have ever reached. It is not merely attraction, it is the feeling of being recognized, named, understood. But what very few empaths realize at that moment is this. This is not the recognition of mature love. It is the recognition of an unhealed wound, encountering a darkness, searching for refuge. In-depth psychology, especially through the lens of Carl Jung, encounters that feel fated are rarely random. They occur when two unconscious structures find each other. When someone who carries light, compassion, and a tendency towards self-sacrifice meets someone who carries power, emptiness, and an ego built from masks. One side tends to forget themselves in order to preserve connection. The other survives by being reflected, supported, and continuously validated. And the moment they meet, an invisible contract is signed. The empath often calls it love. The narcissist calls it something special. But on a deeper level, it is a soul contract, an unwritten, unspoken commitment that nevertheless governs the entire relationship. That contract says, I will stay, I will understand, I will endure, I will not abandon. And in return, the empath believes they will receive attachment, safety, and ultimately the love they have always longed for. But here is the painful truth. You only see after everything collapses. This is a contract the empath was never meant to keep. The narcissist does not enter your life to build a future with you. They enter to activate a process that forces you to confront the deepest parts of yourself. The fear of abandonment, the belief that love must be paid for with sacrifice, and the illusion that if you are good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, the other person will change. In the beginning, everything looks like magic. The connection is so powerful that you believe letting go would mean losing your person. But the deeper you go, the smaller you feel. Boundaries blur. Intuition is questioned. Peace is replaced by constant vigilance. And then you begin to ask, if this is destiny, why does it hurt so much? The answer is not that you love the wrong person. It is that you misunderstood the purpose of this encounter. A soul contract with a narcissist is not designed to last. It does not exist to be saved, repaired, or endured to the end. It exists to be broken at the exact moment you awaken, at the moment you stop playing the role of guardian of someone else's soul. And when you understand that, the entire story turns. It is no longer the question, why did they treat me this way? But a deeper, more important one. Who do I need to become so that I never sign this contract again? From that moment on, your true journey begins. Part 1. A soul contract is not a love destiny, but an unconscious mechanism being activated. The first thing that must be put back in its proper place, otherwise the entire journey that follows will be misunderstood, is the true nature of what empaths often call a soul contract. It is not a sacred vow meant to bind two people together at all costs, nor is it proof that this relationship is noble, rare, or arranged by the universe in the romantic sense we are often told. In reality, A soul contract in the empath-narcissist dynamic functions as an unconscious psychological mechanism, activated at a precise moment when neither person is yet whole. Empaths enter this bond not because they are weak, but because they are open. They possess the capacity to feel deeply, connect quickly, and see potential in others before they see danger. Yet, this very capacity also makes them vulnerable to a critical misunderstanding. They do not always distinguish between intuitive resonance and the activation of an old wound. When they meet a narcissist, the sense of familiarity does not arise because the souls have loved before, but because the empath's nervous system recognizes a deeply familiar emotional structure absence, the need for validation, and an unspoken promise that this time, if I do it right, everything will be different. It's our. At a deeper level, this is where Carl Jung's thinking becomes essential. Jung did not view compelling, obsessive encounters as random. He believed that people are drawn to one another by parts of the unconscious that have not yet been made conscious. Empaths often carry a very particular shadow. They are accustomed from an early age to being the one who understands, who yields, who keeps the peace, who carries emotional responsibility. They learn to love by adapting. They learn to survive by reading others. And they carry a silent belief that their worth lies in their ability to heal. The narcissist, by contrast, carries a different shadow, an inflated outer ego and an inner emptiness. They live through reflection. They cannot feel their own value unless someone is looking at them, admiring them, or placing them at the center. When they meet an empath, these two structures lock together perfectly. The empath feels finally seen. The narcissist feels finally that they exist. That is, when the soul contract forms. But it must be said clearly, this contract is not signed by your mature, conscious self. It is signed by the unhealed parts, by the inner child of the empath still searching for secure attachment, and by the ego of the narcissist searching for fuel to sustain their self-image. From the beginning, this makes the contract temporary. It exists to reveal something, not to sustain long-term stability. This is also why the relationship always begins with such high intensity. Everything moves faster than normal. Intimacy, promises, the feeling of, I've never connected like this with anyone. That intensity is not a sign of deep love. It is a sign that the unconscious has taken control. When the unconscious speaks, reason is pushed aside, warnings are minimized, intuition is misread as hope. At this stage, the empath often begins to give more than is safe for themselves, not because they do not know about boundaries, but because they believe that if this is a soul contract, then endurance must be part of the journey. This is the core reason empaths remain stuck longer than necessary. They do not realize they are trying to uphold a contract that was never designed to be kept. A soul contract with a narcissist is not meant to create lasting attachment. It is meant to bring the empath to a threshold. Either continue losing themselves to preserve connection, or begin to face their own shadow and withdraw their energy. As long as you cannot see this, you will believe suffering is the price of love. But once awareness begins, you realize that suffering is merely the signal that the contract has expired, and you are the one who has not yet let go. And this is where the next phase of the journey begins, when the narcissist is no longer the one you love, but the mirror that forces you to confront the deepest parts of yourself. Part 2. The Shadow Mirror. Why the narcissist does not come to stay, but to reveal the truth. Once the soul contract is activated, the relationship no longer functions as an ordinary encounter between two mature individuals. It shifts into a deeper layer, where the narcissist ceases to be merely a person to love, and becomes an unconscious mirror, reflecting precisely the parts the empath has avoided for years. This is the stage where many people feel deeply confused. Everything feels both intensely real and deeply wrong. There is a sense of profound attachment alongside a vague, nameless unease. At the level of depth psychology, narcissists do not bond through authentic presence. They bond through reflection. They observe you closely, how you love, how you yield, how you apologize even when you are not at fault, how you fear hurting others more than losing yourself. These traits do not make them love you in a mature sense, but they signal that you can keep their structure functioning. And so the relationship shifts into energy extraction, even while intimacy remains on the surface. What empaths often fail to recognize at this stage is that the narcissist does not create the pain, they activate pain that already exists. They do not dismantle a solid self overnight. They repeatedly touch the exact places where you have long been conditioned to sacrifice. Blurred boundaries, the need to be chosen, fear of abandonment, and the belief that love equals endurance. From a Jungian perspective, the shadow is not what is bad, but what has not yet been made conscious. For empaths, the shadow rarely appears as aggression or domination, but as self-erasure, distrust of intuition, and prioritizing others' needs over inner truth. The narcissist enters as a force that compels this shadow to emerge not through teaching, but through repeated friction. Every time you feel you must stay silent to keep the peace, explain yourself to be understood, or try harder to be loved, the shadow is knocking. This is why the relationship changes shape after the initial phase. Tenderness fades. Presence becomes inconsistent. You begin to feel you must read the room, anticipate moods, and adjust yourself to avoid conflict. Most dangerously, you begin to believe it is your fault. You think that if you were more perceptive, more patient, less demanding, everything would return to how it was. But in truth, this is not a temporary malfunction. It is the true nature of the mirror being revealed. Narcissists cannot tolerate inner confrontation. They must displace emptiness and instability onto someone else. Empaths, with their high capacity for sensing and enduring, inadvertently become containers for what the narcissist cannot hold. When you begin to feel exhausted, depleted, and lost, this is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are carrying too much that does not belong to you. At this stage, the soul contract reveals its real purpose. It is no longer, we came together to love, but you must see how far you have lived away from yourself. The narcissist unconsciously plays the role of the exposer, revealing your fragile boundaries, distorted beliefs about love, and the price you are willing to pay to avoid abandonment. This is precisely why the narcissist cannot remain once you begin to change. The moment you stop explaining, stop sacrificing, stop trying to prove your worth, the mirror loses its function. They can no longer extract the reflection they need to exist. But before that happens, the relationship often passes through its most intense phase when you are still in it, yet farther from yourself than ever before. This is not failure. It is a threshold that, once crossed, causes the soul contract to fracture. And if you keep walking, you will arrive at an uncomfortable yet liberating truth. The narcissist was never the center of the story. They were only the catalyst that forced you to face your own shadow, the part that has waited a long time to be seen, named, and finally integrated. Part 3. When the soul contract begins to fracture, the moment the empath stops betraying themselves. There is a very subtle yet decisive moment that many empaths miss if they are not sufficiently aware, and when it is missed, they remain trapped in the old cycle. This moment is not when the relationship officially collapses, nor when the narcissist becomes distant or withdraws. The true fracture of the soul contract occurs when you begin to feel conflicted about the very role you are playing. You are still there, still loving, still trying to understand. Yet inside, a question refuses to stay silent. Why do I have to disappear for this relationship to exist? At this stage, the empath is no longer completely swept away by the initial emotions. Infatuation gives way to exhaustion, hope gives way to vigilance, and most importantly, something inside you begins to resist, not loudly, not explosively, but very quietly. You start to realize that what you are giving is no longer coming from free love, but from fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of breaking the image of being the understanding one, fear that if you stop, everything will fall apart. The narcissist senses this shift even before you can name it. Their entire system depends on the stability of reflection. When you slow down, begin to question, and stop reacting as you once did, that structure immediately destabilizes. This is why at this stage their behavior often escalates. More subtle control, stronger emotional manipulation, or manufactured situations designed to pull you back into your old role. Not because they love more, but because they cannot tolerate losing access to the energy you once supplied. What is crucial to understand is this: a soul contract is not broken by a single rational decision. It fractures when you stop colluding in your own self-betrayal, when you stop explaining away behaviors that hurt you, when you stop minimizing your feelings to keep the peace, when you stop treating exhaustion as the price of love. These changes may seem small, but at the unconscious level, their impact is profound. From Carl Jung's perspective, individuation does not begin with becoming better, but with becoming more honest about one's inner experience. And this honesty is the greatest threat to a narcissist. When you begin to trust your own perceptions, the mirror they need to survive starts to crack. They can no longer easily blame, reverse the narrative, or make you doubt yourself. This is also the stage where empaths often feel guilt, not because they have done something wrong, but because they are breaking an unconscious promise. The promise to always stay, always understand, always endure. This guilt does not originate in the present moment. It comes from deep layers of emotional memory, where you once learned that love meant one-sided responsibility. Here, the true nature of the soul contract becomes clear. It is not an agreement between two free souls, but an arrangement built on lack. When the empath begins to withdraw energy, the relationship does not immediately end. On the contrary, it often becomes more chaotic. The narcissist may appear confused, enraged, or suddenly return with displays of former tenderness. But if you look closely, one pattern remains consistent. Every behavior is aimed at pulling you back into your old role. This is the final test of the soul contract, not to see whether they will change, but to see whether you are still willing to trade yourself for connection. The moment you stop answering that test with sacrifice, the contract begins to lose its power. No declarations are needed. No dramatic ending is required. You simply stand still in your truth. From that point on, the story no longer revolves around how can I make them understand, but shifts onto an entirely different axis. What foundation will you build yourself upon when external reflection is no longer there? That is the point of no return, and also where your journey truly begins to move into a new chapter. Part 4. Sovereign Silence. When the empath withdraws energy and the contract expires, after the soul contract begins to fracture, there is a phase that is very easily misunderstood. Externally, it may look like distance, coldness, or even avoidance. Internally, however, this is not escape. It is the conscious withdrawal of energy. The empath no longer reacts by old reflexes, no longer explains to be understood, no longer tries to fix what was never their responsibility. And it is here that a very different kind of power emerges: sovereign silence. This silence is not meant to punish the narcissist. It is not reverse manipulation, nor an attempt to prove worth. It is simply the moment you stop participating in a system that runs on tension, reaction, and one-sided emotional obligation. When you stop feeding it energy, the structure reveals its own emptiness, and the narcissist senses this immediately. All of the narcissist's power lies not in inner strength, but in their ability to regulate emotion through others. They need reactions to shape themselves, attention to feel real, conflict to avoid confronting their inner void. When the empath withdraws reactions, the narcissist does not merely lose you, they lose their regulatory anchor. This is why, at this stage, their behaviors often become more extreme, either attempting to pull you back with sudden softness or pushing you away with anger, blame, and smear tactics. Yet regardless of the form it takes, the essence remains the same. They are trying to reactivate an expired contract. What causes empaths to waver at this stage is not love, but the residue of an unconscious promise. You are accustomed to being the emotional timekeeper of the relationship, the one who speaks first, repairs first, yields first. When you fall silent, a deeply uncomfortable feeling arises, as if you are doing something wrong. But that feeling is not a moral compass. It is simply the trace of an old role being dismantled. At the deepest level, sovereign silence is the most powerful act of terminating a soul contract. No declarations are necessary, no doors need to be slammed shut. You simply stop feeding the familiar loops. When the narcissist no longer receives the same reactions, every strategy begins to fail. Logic no longer pulls you into arguments. Sadness no longer compels you to comfort. Anger no longer makes you shrink. And it is precisely this non-participation that reveals a truth once obscured. The relationship existed through the effort of one side alone. This is also when the empath begins to sense a strange internal shift. First comes emptiness, then quiet, and finally a kind of peace never known before. Not peace because everything is resolved, but peace because you are no longer betraying yourself. You begin to trust your own perceptions without needing validation. You begin to stand without external reflection. And when that happens, the soul contract not only loses its power over the narcissist, it loses its reason to exist within you. The narcissist may still try to return. They may still reach for you through memories, old promises, or unfinished stories. But now there is a fundamental difference. You are no longer in the position of the one who must respond. You have moved into the position of the one who chooses silence when needed, distance when needed, and self-allegiance without justification. From here, the focus of the journey shifts entirely. It is no longer about what they will do next, but about a deeper, more mature question. When no unconscious contract remains binding you, upon what foundation will you build your relationship with yourself? Part 5. Individuation. When the empath reclaims the self and light no longer needs a mirror. Once sovereign silence has been established and the soul contract truly ends, a new phase opens, quiet, undramatic, yet deep and irreversible. This is when the empath begins the process of reclaiming the parts of themselves that were dispersed throughout the relationship. It is no longer an effort to become better, but a journey of returning to wholeness. What was once abandoned to keep the peace, suppressed to avoid conflict, or sacrificed to preserve connection now returns, one piece at a time. At first, this return does not feel like victory. It feels like emptiness. For a long time, the empath's identity was anchored in a role, the one who understands, the one who rescues, the one who holds the emotional rhythm together. When that role disappears, a void appears. But this void is not loss. It is the space required for a new structure to form. For the first time in a long time, you do not need to react in order to exist. You do not need to be seen to know you have value. You begin to feel your own presence without an audience. This is the phase where the empath's shadow is integrated rather than avoided. The shadow here is not explosive anger or controlling others. It is the right to say no without guilt, the ability to withdraw without explaining, the acceptance that some relationships cannot be saved and that this does not make you less loving. When the shadow is integrated, compassion does not disappear. It is placed where it belongs, first toward yourself. The greatest change in this stage is the internal shift in the axis of power. Before, You measured your worth through external harmony. Is everyone okay? Is the relationship stable? Did I disappoint someone? Now the axis turns inward. You begin to ask, is this true for me? Am I betraying myself? What are my body and my intuition telling me? These questions do not create drama, but they create clarity, the very thing you used to keep sacrificing for hope. In this stage of individuation, the empath is no longer drawn to high emotional intensity. Bonds built on drama, volatility, or vague promises begin to lose their pull, not because you become cold, but because your nervous system is no longer addicted to instability. You realize peace is not boring. It is the signature of a healthy inner structure. From this point on, your standard changes permanently. What is striking is that as you move deeper into individuation, the narcissist, whether they still appear in your life or not, no longer holds the central role in your story. They are no longer a lesson to decode, nor a wound to keep treating. They become a closed chapter, because what they once controlled access to your energy, your attention, your reflection, has been fully reclaimed. You do not need to shut the door with resentment. The door closes on its own when there is nothing left to exchange. Individuation does not turn the empath into a hardened or closed-off version of themselves. It turns you into a boundaried subject, where love no longer equals self-trade. You still can connect deeply, but you no longer lose yourself inside connection. You still have compassion, but you no longer use it to justify harm. And most importantly, you no longer sign unconscious contracts rooted in the fear of abandonment. When your light no longer needs reflection, it becomes self-generated, not to prove, not to attract, simply to exist. And it is precisely here that the journey with the narcissist, once called destiny, reveals its true nature. Not the place you belonged, but the gate you were forced to walk through in order to become yourself. Part 6. After the contract ends, the empath steps out of the loop, and the world is no longer the same. There is a phase that is rarely spoken about, because it is not dramatic, not shocking, and does not satisfy anyone's desire to watch someone collapse. Yet it is the most decisive phase of all. The phase after the soul contract has fully ended, when the empath begins living from a new inner structure, not restoring the relationship, not proving that they have moved on, but changing their position of being in the world. In this phase, the first thing the empath realizes is that the outside world no longer hits with the same force. Things that once sent you into panic, the silence of others, a shifting glance, not being chosen, no longer pierce the nervous system at its core. Not because you have become numb, but because you no longer place your self-worth inside other people's reactions. The old system where you constantly adjusted yourself to preserve connection has been dismantled. This is also when many empaths are surprised as they look back at themselves. You see more clearly the signs you once overlooked, words that never aligned, behaviors that made you shrink, moments when intuition warned you but you chose silence. The difference now is this: you do not blame yourself. You understand yourself. And that understanding does not lead to self-punishment. It leads to natural boundaries. You do not need to learn to be cautious. Your body already knows. Another major change is how you perceive new relationships. You are no longer captivated by intensity, grand promises, or the feeling of destiny arriving fast. Instead, you notice things that are simple yet enduring: consistency, emotional responsibility, respect for boundaries even when they are not repeatedly stated. You no longer seek someone to fill you, you seek companionship, and only when companionship does not require self-erasure. At a deeper level, this is when the empath truly exits the unconscious loop. In Jung's terms, once a shadow lesson has been made conscious and integrated, the unconscious no longer has a reason to repeat the same script. This is not moralistic or punitive. It is structural. You no longer attract the same kind of person, not because you force yourself to avoid them, but because the inner content has changed. When the foundation shifts, the old relationships have nothing left to attach to. This also explains why, in this stage, the narcissist, if they still appear in your thoughts, no longer creates disturbance. There is no longer the question, why did they do that? No more need to understand, analyze, or decode, not because you understand everything, but because you do not need understanding in order to be free. Your freedom no longer depends on what they realize, how much they regret, or how far they change. The most profound part of this stage is the transformation of how you are with yourself. Before, being alone could mean emptiness, anxiety, or a sense of lack. Now, being alone becomes a space of restoration. You no longer use connection to escape yourself. You remain with yourself without dispersing. And this capacity is what was stolen for the longest time in the old relationship. After the soul contract ends, the empath does not return to who they used to be. You become a version that cannot be reversed, not because you are harder, but because you are clearer. Not because you have lost faith, but because you no longer offer faith blindly. You step out of the loop not through victory, but through quiet maturity, a maturity that does not require anyone's recognition in order to exist. And from here, the story truly closes, not with a loud ending, but with a very simple truth. You no longer live inside unconscious contracts. You live inside your own conscious choice. In the end, what matters most is not what the narcissist did, how they changed, or whether they ever truly understood you. Those questions once kept you trapped because they placed the center of gravity outside of you. But as this journey comes to a close, that center has shifted. It has returned to where it always belonged, within you. Meeting a narcissist was not a mistake. It was an activating encounter. A door opened so you could see what you were not yet safe enough to see before. How you love, how you sacrifice, and how you once confused connection with self-abandonment. This soul contract did not come to be preserved. It came to be completed. And when you complete it, you do not carry resentment, nor do you require an apology. You carry clarity. In the spirit of Carl Jung, what remains unconscious repeats itself as fate. But once it is made conscious, it loses its power to govern. That is what has happened to you. You are no longer drawn into relationships that require you to disappear in order to stay. You no longer mistake intensity for love, or drama for depth. You know the feeling of peace, and you no longer trade it away. This ending is not loud. There is no public victory. There is only a quiet, solid truth. You have returned to yourself. No reflection needed. No need to be chosen. No need to prove that you are worthy. You are present, and that is enough. If there is one thing to carry forward from this story, it is this. You were not born to uphold soul contracts rooted in fear. You were born to live in choice, boundaries, and inner sovereignty. And when you stand in that place, every relationship from here on, if it comes, will no longer be a place where you lose yourself, but a place where you are free to be yourself.